The blood had already reached the drain. It pooled in dark, slow rivers across the polished titanium floor of Station, Harmony's medical bay, spreading outward like a map of something going terribly wrong. The walls pulsed red with emergency alerts. Equipment screamed in a language of numbers, all of them pointing in the same direction. Too late. And at the center of it all, behind a shimmering containment field, was the thing responsible. The Dravok. 6 legs, teeth the length of combat blades. A body built by evolution on a death world where mercy was never a survival trait. It hurled itself against the energy barrier again and again, each impact shaking the floor beneath every pair of feet in the room. Medics pressed themselves against the walls. A small gray-skinned Krellin assistant kept one hand on the emergency panel, fingers trembling, voice barely holding together as he read the data. Sedation, ineffective, heart rate, critical, internal bleeding and accelerating. Dr. Nara stood at the center of the chaos like a statue in a storm. 30 years. That was how long she had practiced veterinary medicine across this galaxy. 30 years of alien physiology, of cross-species emergencies, of moments where her insectoid brain processed outcomes faster than most sentient creatures could even frame a question. She had saved lives other practitioners had already written off, but she had also learned in those 30 years that some decisions were not about skill. They were about survival. She watched the Dravok tear gouges into the metal floor, deep furrows, like it was trying to claw its way to something or away from something that in her analytical mind completed its calculation in seconds. The answer was not one she needed to feel. It was one she simply needed to execute. Contact the owner, she said, mandibles clicking with restrained precision. Inform them of our decision. Before the Quellen could move, a shape pushed through the gathered crowd, broad-shouldered, heavy-footed, the kind of presence that fills a doorway. Captain Roth, his granic features were carved from something that looked like ancient stone. And right now they were pulled into an expression that cut through the clinical atmosphere like a blade. You are not killing him. Nara did not turn around. Your feelings are understandable, Captain. They are also irrelevant. He saved my entire crew. Roth's voice dropped, roughened. Every single one of them. That creature threw himself into danger for people he didn't even know. And you want to put him down because he's scared? I want to prevent casualties in my medical bay. Nara finally turned, her compound eyes reflecting the red emergency light. He is an apex predator from Dravis. 4. His pain has broken down whatever behavioral conditioning allowed him to exist around others. Every model, every protocol, every precedent tells me the same thing. There is no safe approach. If I send my staff in there, I am signing their deaths. Roth opened his mouth. She cut him off. I will not do that. Not for any animal. Prepare the termination sequence. The word settled over the room like a physical weight. Staff began to move and reluctant, professional, grieving in the quiet way that people who care for living things always do when they have to end one. The Dravok slammed himself against the barrier once more, then collapsed to his knees, chest heaving, eyes wide and glassy with pain. Wait. The voice was calm, almost unreasonably so. It didn't belong to anyone who should have been speaking at that moment. No rank, no history on this station, no particular reason to be heard. It came from near the back of the bay, where a human had been standing quietly for the last several minutes, arms folded, eyes fixed on the Dravok, with an expression that Nara could not immediately categorize. She was good at reading faces, even alien ones. But this one gave her pause. Dr. Ben Foster had been at Station Harmony for exactly 3 days, transferred from a small animal clinic on a planet so unremarkable it barely warranted a star chart entry. His file was thin. His credentials were adequate, not extraordinary. When Nara had reviewed his background, she had noted his species, peculiar cultural attachment to dangerous animals, and filed it under interesting, but not medically relevant. Now she looked at him with different eyes. You have an objection, Dr. Foster? He stepped forward, moving toward the containment field with a casualness that made 2 of her assistants physically recoil. He stopped just outside the barrier and stared at the creature inside with the focused attention of someone reading a language no one else in the room could see. That animal isn't attacking, Ben said. He's protecting himself. There's a difference. The outcome for my staff would be identical. Maybe. He turned to look at her directly. But look at his eyes. Nara was not accustomed to being told what to look at. But something in Ben's voice, not arrogance, not desperation, something quieter and more certain than either, made her activate her optical enhancers. She looked. The Dravok's pupils were blown wide. Not with aggression, not with the flat predatory calculation of a hunting animal, with something else. Something she recognized from a different context entirely. Terror. He's afraid, she said before she meant to. Completely. Ben's gaze returned to the creature, and he's in more pain than most beings could endure conscious. See how his body keeps curving left? He's not posturing. He's guarding his wound. Every time something comes near him, his brain tells him that thing is going to make the pain worse. So he explodes outward, not to kill but to create distance. It's a panic response. It's what any creature does when it has no other options left. The medical bay was very quiet now. Even the Dravok had stilled slightly, though his chest still heaved, still bled. Nara processed this. Your observation is accurate, she said carefully. His behavioral pattern is consistent with fear-based reactivity. This changes nothing. Standard sedatives do not metabolize in Dravok physiology. We have no chemical option, and no unprotected approach survives contact with an animal in this state. Ben looked at her steadily. Then let me try without sedatives. The silence that followed was total. Someone, Nara could not tell who, made a sound that might have been a laugh. Or a gasp, perhaps both. That, Nara said with complete clinical honesty, is suicide. Maybe. He said it the same way he'd said it before, with that same unnerving evenness. Or maybe the things I've learned are more useful here than anything in your protocol library. Human arrogance, human experience. He held her gaze. I grew up with wolves, Dr. Nara, real ones. I've worked with bears, with big cats, with animals that weighed twice what I do, and could have ended me 10 times. Before I hit the ground, I'm still here because I didn't treat them as threats to be managed. I treated them as individuals to be understood. He glanced back at the Dravok. That's what he is. Not a statistic, not a danger classification. He's an individual who is suffering and terrified and completely alone right now. Nara studied the human for a long moment. She ran the probability models, outcomes variables, risk assessments. She ran them twice because the first result seemed implausible. Then she looked at the Dravok again, saw the blood still spreading, saw the breath coming in shorter, faster bursts, saw an animal who was running out of time regardless of what she decided. If you are injured, she said quietly, it is not the station's liability. I know. Captain Roth stepped back. She turned to her Quellan assistant, who looked at her like she had lost her mind. Lower the forward section of the containment field. The protest was immediate. Multiple voices, multiple species, all arriving at the same conclusion in their own language. You cannot be serious. Ben was already moving toward the panel. Captain Roth grabbed his arm. Ben, listen to me. I watched that animal protect my crew. I watched him fight things that should have killed him. He is not a dog. He is not something that responds to kind words. Every animal responds to something, Ben said. I just have to find what it is. He placed his hand on the control panel. The energy field across the front of the containment area flickered and died. Nothing stood between Ben Foster and 600 pounds of traumatized apex predator, except 3 meters of blood-stained floor and a decision that no one else in the room would have made. He crouched. He made himself small. He angled his body sideways, presenting no direct challenge, no straight-on confrontation. His hands came up, loose, open, palm facing down, the universal posture of a creature that has chosen not to fight. And then he stepped into the containment area. The Dravok's head swung toward him like a cannon tracking a target. Every muscle in that massive body coiled, the lips pulled back, and the sound that came from deep in the creature's chest wasn't a growl so much as a vibration at something that bypassed ears and resonated directly in bone. Then stopped. He did not run. He did not retreat. He did not look directly into those wide, fear-filled eyes. He looked at a point slightly past the creature's shoulder, the universal signal among Earth's predators, that I am not here to challenge you. And then he spoke. His voice was so low that Nara had to increase her audio receptors to catch it. Easy, buddy. Easy now. The growl stopped. It did not fade gradually. It stopped, cut off like a current had been switched somewhere deep inside the animal. The Dravok's ears, which had been pressed flat in pure aggression, lifted just slightly and then tilted forward. Nobody in the medical bay breathed. Ben took one step, then another. Slow, deliberate, each movement telegraphed in advance. Nothing sudden, nothing threatening. He kept speaking in that same impossible quiet voice, words that most of the aliens in the room couldn't fully translate, but that somehow didn't require translation. Nobody here is going to hurt you. I know you're scared. I know everything hurts right now. But I'm not here to add to that. I promise. The Dravok's breathing changed. The rapid, shallow panic breaths began to slow, just slightly, just enough. His tail, which had been whipping back and forth hard enough to dent metal, drifted to the floor. Ben extended his hand, palm down, fingers loose, an offering, not a demand. The Dravok stared at it, sniffed the air, And then, in a moment that Nara would replay in her memory for the rest of her professional life, the massive creature lowered his head, not in submission, not in defeat, in recognition. Ben closed the final distance. His hand touched the top of the Dravok's skull and gently, the way you touch something precious and fragile, even when it doesn't look like it could ever be called that. There we go, he whispered. I've got you. Let's get you fixed up. Dr. Nara stood frozen at the edge of the containment zone, her 30 years of experience sitting very quietly in the back of her mind, offering her nothing, because nothing she knew had predicted. The creature that had been destroying titanium restraints 10 minutes ago, now lay still beneath a human hand, breathing slowly, eyes half closed, trusting something it had no logical reason to trust. She had always believed that the highest form of veterinary medicine was knowledge, protocol, precision. She was beginning to suspect she had been missing something essential, something no textbook had ever taught her. That was the name Captain Roth gave him. And it fit, not as something grand or formal, but as something earned. The surgeries were long and complicated. Ben worked beside Nara for 11 straight hours, his hand never entirely leaving the animal's body even during the procedures, maintaining that thread of contact that seemed to be the one thing keeping Duke's vital signs from spiking back into the red. When the final incision was closed and the monitors settled into steady, rhythmic certainty, the medical bay staff stood in the peculiar silence of people who have witnessed something they will spend a long time trying to explain. Nara spent 3 days reviewing her behavioral models. She found no framework that adequately described what Ben had done. So she did something that for her was genuinely unprecedented. She went and asked him. She found him in the recovery ward, sitting on the floor beside Duke's resting platform, speaking softly, about nothing in particular, describing the layout of a forest on Earth, the sound of rain on leaves, the smell of soil after a storm. Duke's eyes were open, following the sound of his voice with the quiet attention of a creature that has decided, against all prior evidence, that the world contains something worth listening to. You are narrating a planet he has never visited, Nara observed. He doesn't need to have been there, Ben said. He just needs to hear that there's somewhere calm in the universe. Nara sat, an unusual choice for her, but the moment seemed to require it. Explain to me, she said carefully, what you did in that containment field. Not the technique. The principle, Ben thought for a moment. You were treating a dangerous animal. I was meeting a frightened individual. The difference in approach follows from the difference in how you see the patient. And if your reading of him had been wrong, if he had been aggressive rather than afraid, then I'd probably be dead. He said it without drama. But I've made that calculation 100 times, and every time it comes down to the same thing. If you treat a living creature like it's already a threat, you guarantee it becomes one. If you treat it like it has a reason for what it's doing, sometimes you find the reason, and then you find the solution. Nara was quiet for a long moment. Duke's chest rose and fell in slow, even rhythm. The monitors above him displayed numbers that 3 days ago had been a countdown. Now they were simply proof of life. Then slowly, her mandibles clicked in what Ben would later learn was the Altheran expression of a decision being made. I would like to learn this, she said. Properly. Ben looked at her, genuinely surprised. I have spent 30 years being very good at veterinary medicine, she continued, her voice carrying none of its usual clinical detachment. I am beginning to understand that being good at it is not the same as being complete at it. What happened next did not come from a plan. It came from one moment, witnessed by the right people at the right time, spreading outward the way a single stone dropped into still water will move the surface all the way to the shore. Word traveled through Station Harmony, the way word always travels in close quarters, faster than anyone intends, further than anyone expects. Staff who had been in the medical bay talked. Captain Roth talked. Passengers from the colony transport, the ones whose animals had been too traumatized to eat, too broken by the long journey through space to function, started coming to Ben with quiet, desperate requests. He helped each one, not with medicine alone, but with presence, with patience, with the willingness to sit on a floor beside a frightened creature for as long as it took. A keeper named Voss approached him one afternoon, clutching a datapad to her chest like it contained something fragile. She worked with a large, powerful animal called Stryker, a creature that had stopped eating entirely, that had retreated, so deep into fear it barely seemed to register the world around it anymore. She had the worn expression of someone who had been frightened for a long time, not for herself, but for something she loved and could not reach. I've tried everything, she said. Every protocol, every recommendation. He's disappearing in front of me and I don't know how to stop it. Ben looked through the observation glass at Stryker. The animal sat pressed into the corner of his enclosure, weight forward, head low, eyes fixed on a point that existed somewhere beyond the visible world. How long have you had him? Ben asked. 3 years, she swallowed hard. He used to trust me completely. I don't know what I did wrong. You probably didn't do anything wrong. Ben watched Stryker for a long moment. The journey broke something in him. The noise, the confinement, the disorientation. His nervous system got overwhelmed and never came back down. He's not withdrawing from you. He's withdrawing from everything. Because everything became too much. He turned to her. Can I show you something? What followed was not a procedure. It was closer to a translation lesson. In how to make your body speak before your words do. In how to enter a space without claiming it. In how to locate the frequency of calm that lives inside you, even when you're frightened, and project it outward like a signal, until another living thing picks it up. Voss was a quick study. Her love for Stryker had never been the problem. It never had been. She simply hadn't known how to deliver it in a language he could receive in the state he was in. Within an hour, Stryker had crossed the full length of the enclosure. He placed his head against her hand. She made a sound Ben would remember for years. Not quite crying, not quite laughing. Something that exists only in the specific moment when something you had quietly begun to grieve comes back to you. Her other hand came up slowly and rested against Stryker's face, and the animal leaned into it like he was returning to something he had been searching for across a very long distance. How did you know? She whispered. How did you know he was still in there? Ben watched Stryker's shoulders drop, the last of the tension leaving his body like a tide going out. Because they almost always are, he said quietly. They get buried, but they're almost always still in there, waiting for someone to come far enough in to find them. 6 weeks after Duke's surgery, Station Harmony's governing council convened an emergency session. Ben arrived expecting a liability review, administrative processing, the kind of formal, necessary friction that always follows when someone breaks protocol and it happens to work. He did not expect the architectural plans spread across the table. A dedicated training institute, the council chair said, her forehands moving across the schematics with the precision of someone who had been thinking about this for longer than 6 weeks. Formal curriculum, 60 teaching positions, new ward designs built entirely around emotional integration rather than containment, efficiency. She paused. We are also actively recruiting 50 human veterinarians from Earth to join the faculty. Ben stared at the plans, classrooms, practice bays, recovery spaces designed with the animal's psychological state as the first variable, not the last. Everything he had tried to explain in a dozen quiet conversations, rendered into architecture. There is one more thing, the chair said. A ship arrived this morning. The cargo is of considerable importance. I think you should see it yourself. The docking bay held crates, dozens of them, arranged with the reverent precision of people who understood that what was inside could not be replaced. Through the ventilation gaps came sounds, some restless and searching, some silent in a way that was heavier than noise. A Lion official crossed the bay before Ben had finished reading the manifest. Her blue skin carried the ceremonial markings of the conservation fleet, and her voice had the tightly controlled urgency of someone managing a catastrophe, with the last tools available to them. Dr. Foster, what you see here are the final breeding populations of 17 endangered species combined. She held his gaze. Every established facility has failed them. Stress responses to acute reproductive instinct completely suppressed. Traditional approaches, optimal nutrition, controlled environments, every variable accounted for have produced nothing. Some of these species may not survive another failed season. A breath. Breeding window opens in 6 weeks. Ben moved slowly between the crates. He looked into each one. And in each pair of eyes, across 17 species, 17 entirely different anatomies and evolutionary histories, he found the same expression looking back at him. Not aggression, not confusion, surrender. These animals had been measured and monitored by some of the finest conservation science in the galaxy. They had been given everything that data said they needed. No one in all those decades of careful, well-intentioned effort had stopped to ask them what they wanted. No one had treated them as individuals capable of having preferences. They had been managed as specimens, precious, irreplaceable, and profoundly alone. Ben stopped walking. He turned to face the Lion official. I'll need Dr. Nera, keeper. Foss, every handler, from the colony transport who's willing to stay on. He glanced at Duke, who had padded silently into the bay behind him. and now stood at his side, reading the room with ancient, unhurried attention. "And I'll need you to trust a process that will not look like science." "Not at first." The official's expression tightened. "We have invested decades in science." "I know." Ben held her gaze steadily. "Let's try something older." They called it the Vigil, not officially. Officially, it carried a title long enough to fill a report heading. But among the keepers and veterinarians who actually did the work, it was the Vigil, because that was what it was. Each endangered animal received one keeper, a single person, assigned entirely and exclusively to that one creature, with no competing responsibilities, and no performance metrics beyond a simple instruction: be present. They did not enter the enclosures carrying instruments or evaluation protocols. They entered carrying time, sitting nearby, speaking softly in whatever voice felt natural, learning the individual rhythms and preferences of each animal the way you learn those things about a person. Through attention, through consistency, through the daily unglamorous work of showing up and meaning it. Duke moved through the wards every day. This was Ben's idea, and it was the element that drew the most skepticism from the lion officials. Deploying a Drevok, an apex predator from a death world, as a stabilizing presence among prey species and sensitive conservation animals. It made no conventional sense. It worked completely. Animals that had refused food for weeks would accept it when Duke settled nearby. Creatures that flinched from the approach of any keeper would allow contact in the Dravok's calm, unhurried presence. He moved through those wards like something ancient and certain, and the animals around him responded to what he projected with a simplicity that no technology could have replicated. Safety, familiarity, the signal that this place, these people, this situation could be trusted. "He is teaching them," Nara said one afternoon, watching Duke lie beside a trembling herbivore that had barely moved in days. The herbivore's breathing was beginning, slowly and almost imperceptibly, to match his, teaching them that this is a safe place. "Animals learn safety from each other," Ben said. "It's older than language. If one member of a group settles, the others feel it. He's not doing anything complicated." He watched Duke's tail move in one slow, easy arc. "He's just being an example of what survived." Nara was quiet for a moment. "He's doing what you did," she said. "That first day, in the containment field." Ben looked at her. "He walked into a frightened world," she said, "and refused to be afraid of it. And so the frightened world changed. On the 43rd day, the Kelvin birds began their courtship display. It is a thing worth describing, not merely as biology but as event. The Kelvin mating ritual is intricate and entirely involuntary. It cannot be performed under duress. It cannot be triggered by optimal conditions alone. It requires both participants to have genuinely decided, at some level below conscious thought, that the world around them is safe enough to be vulnerable in. You cannot replicate it. You cannot manufacture it. It either happens or it does not. And for 53 years across every facility, the Lian conservation fleet had ever operated, it had not. The Lian chief scientist stood at the observation window for a long time without speaking. When she finally turned, her expression had traveled through several distinct territories and arrived somewhere that had no established name in her language. "Decades," she said, very quietly. "We tried for decades." "You were optimizing the conditions," Ben said. "We tried to change how they felt about the conditions. It's a different problem entirely." "Yes," she looked back through the glass. "Yes, it is. 14 of the 17 species mated successfully that season. The 3 that did not were not stressed, not suppressed, not broken. They were simply incompatible with their available partners, which is not failure. That is nature proceeding with honesty." Which, Ben had come to believe, was all any living thing was ever really asking for. 9 months later, the first captive-born generation arrived. 17 species, hundreds of new lives, small and fragile and impossibly precious, born into a world that had finally learned to treat their parents as individuals, rather than data points. Their parents were calm. Their parents were present. Their parents had not been broken by the experience of becoming parents, because someone had taken the time, weeks before any of this was possible, to ask what they needed and then actually listen to the answer. Ben held a Kelvin chick in his palm on the morning of its first full day alive. It weighed almost nothing. Its feathers were still damp with the effort of arrival. Its parents watched from the perch above, unafraid, attentive, with none of the desperate vigilance of animals that have learned the world cannot be trusted. The chick looked up at him. Its eyes were very new. They held no history of harm, no memory of concrete floors or cold measurements or the long, grinding stress of being studied without being seen. Only the present moment, only the warmth of a hand beneath it and the soft, hum of a station that had, against considerable odds, become something worth being born into. Easy, buddy, Ben whispered. Welcome to the galaxy. The training institute opened on a Tuesday. 300 students arrived, from 40 species. Across the quadrant, more than twice the projected enrollment. They came from facilities that had heard what happened at Station Harmony, and felt something shift in their understanding of what they had chosen to do with their lives. They came because they had entered their profession for a reason, and somewhere in the years of protocols and efficiency metrics, that reason had gotten buried. They came to dig it back up. Nara delivered the opening address. It was precise, structured, and entirely unlike anything she had said in 30 years of professional practice. She spoke about the difference between managing life and honoring it. About the gap between being technically proficient and being genuinely present. About the morning she had stood at the edge of a containment field and watched a human being do something that every model she had ever trusted told her was impossible, and realized in that moment that her models had an error she had never thought to look for. She did not call what Ben had done a miracle. She called it a methodology, but she said it with something in her voice that made 300 students lean forward in their seats without knowing why. Ben's sister called from Earth on the evening after the opening. Her face on the data pad was lit with a specific kind of pride, the kind that belongs to people who believed in someone before that someone had any evidence they were right. Every veterinary school on Earth, Ben. Every single one. They're teaching your methods in all of them now. She shook her head slowly. You changed the whole galaxy. It wasn't just me, he said. Don't. Her voice firm gently but without hesitation. Don't minimize it. You walked into a room where everyone had already decided it was over, and you made a different decision. That's not luck. That's not even just skill. That's character. That's who you are. Take the credit. After the call ended, he sat in the central garden for a long time. Duke was stretched out across his feet, enormous, warm, radiating the deep and uncomplicated contentment of an animal that knows exactly where it belongs. His tail moved in a slow, rhythmic arc against the ground. His eyes were closed. Around them, Station Harmony breathed, not the mechanical breath of systems cycling through their routines, but the living breath of hundreds of creatures resting in the dark, healing, growing stronger, dreaming whatever it is that animals dream, when they have finally been given reason to sleep without fear. Ben looked at the memorial stone at the garden center. He had written the words himself, on a night when he'd been searching for a way to say something that felt too large for ordinary language. Every creature, no matter how small or strange, or dangerous, deserves someone who will look at them and say, easy, buddy. I've got you. Below the inscription, a list of names stretched across the stone face and onto a second panel and had already begun, filling a third. Animals who had come to Station Harmony broken and left whole. Each name a life that had nearly been written off. Each name proof that the calculation and the one Ben made every time he stepped toward something frightened and had been worth making. He looked down at Duke. The Dravok opened one eye, found Ben looking at him, closed it again with the absolute composure of a creature that has decided, permanently and without reservation, that it is exactly where it should be. Did we make a difference? Ben asked quietly. Duke's tail thumped the ground. Once. Slow and certain as a heartbeat. Ben smiled. The galaxy was vast and ancient and full of suffering, that no single station, no single method, no single human could hope to address entirely. But it was also full of this, a garden in the stars, a sleeping animal, a stone with words that were traveling now into every corner of that enormous dark, carried forward in the hands of 300 students who had come to learn that the most powerful medicine in the universe could not be synthesized or measured or contained in a protocol. It could only be given, freely, patiently, without guarantee of anything in return, one frightened creature at a time. Easy, buddy. I've got you. And mean every word.